Throughout the decade so far, we have been graced from the heavens with a lot of great movies and TV shows based off of somewhat popular indie comics. The two big examples being Amazon Prime's The Boys and Invincible, both being huge instant successes for Amazon Prime. But there are a lot of other great indie comics that I think deserve a shot at being adapted like those shows. And when I mean adapted, I'm mostly picturing the comic as a TV show rather than a movie, just because I feel like it works a lot better with the pacing of the overall story in the comic, and side plots from the story that is being adapted. Anyways, at first I had no idea how I wanted to structure this list. I didn't know if I wanted to make it just a list where I go through every entry in no particular order, or I do the complete opposite, where I make a very structured list where the entries are ranked. Kinda like a shitty Watch Mojo top 10 video, if you will. But instead of doing a top 10 list, I'm doing top 5. Why? I don't know. I feel pretty lazy today. I'm also going to try to spoil these comics as little as possible for you, so you can read these comics for yourself, and be as surprised as I was when I read these comics for the first time. I'm also going to add links to Amazon so you can buy these comics, and if you do buy these comics from the links, then you'll be supporting the small cause of helping Jeff Bezos buy another yacht. But I do think if you have a local comic shop instead, go and support them, cause they need it, and I love comic shops. Anyways, let's add some rules to this list. First off, I will not include any licensed comics. Even though most licensed comics are published by other big comic publishers, like IDW or Dynamite Comics. But here's the thing, most of them are already based off of an already established property, like a popular TV show, or a movie for example. So it's pretty much just the opposite of the topic of this video. Man, do I want to make a video on licensed comics? Maybe. Call me back in the near future when the new G.I. Joe comic series comes out by Joshua Williamson and Tom Riley, and then I'll think about it. The final rule I'm including in this list is that I'm not including any comic series that already have a TV show or movie in development. Like, for example, I would have included Something is Killing the Children, but since there's apparently a Netflix show in the works, then I'm not talking about it, even though I do love that comic, and you should check it out. And I'm also not including 8 Billion Genies, another comic that I really love, because I guess Amazon Prime has their own sort of plans with that comic and adapting it. I don't know, it sounds really confusing. So I guess both of those are honorable mentions, I guess. The reason why I'm not including these series on the list is because the purpose of this video is to bring spotlight to a lot of comics that I love, and so I can give these comics a spotlight. Anyways, after all that over-explaining, I think it's finally time to get onto this list. Number 5. Now, I want to preface this by saying I do not give two shits about wrestling. I think it's the most boring and repetitive thing to watch on television, and the only thing good to come out of wrestling is our Lord and Savior, Dave Bautista. I would rather watch paint dry instead of watch fucking wrestling. Well, okay, maybe not that. We are getting pretty off topic, so let's get back on track. Do a Powerbomb is a 7-issue miniseries written and illustrated by Daniel Warren Johnson, colored by Mike Spicer, and lettered by Russ Wooten. This series is all about Lona Steelrose, who wants to be a pro wrestler just like her dead mother, but she's living under her shadow. Everything changes when a wrestling-obsessed necromancer asks her to join the grandest pro wrestling tournament of all time in the galaxy, with so many different colorful characters with awesome character designs of their own. And she decides to team up with her mother's biggest rival, Cobra Sun, and the two compete together as a team. I really love this comic, and that might just be because I've been on a huge Daniel Warren Johnson kick lately, because I absolutely love his recent Transformers series from Skybound's Energon universe. And this comic is no different. This series is so emotional and has so much heart, especially with the theme of legacy, with Lona trying to improve her skills as a wrestler, all because to keep up the legacy of her mom, especially after watching her be killed by Cobra Sun right in front of her as a child. So that really drives her purpose of becoming a wrestler, just like her. This comic is also very well paced, and doesn't drag much in these 7 issues. I think this movie would make an awesome movie. Maybe not live action. Because you know the studio making this hypothetical film would make like 90% of it CGI and make it a modern day Shark Boy and Lava Girl. And you know the studio would totally overwork the VFX workers. So much so that they would never see their families again. So maybe make this hypothetical movie animated instead. Anyways, I'm gonna move on before this segment gets a little too real. Number 4. In 2021, Jeff Johns and Gary Frank, the DC legends behind stories like Superman Secret Origin, Batman Earth 1, Shazam, and so much more, brought us the miniseries Gyer. And this series is fantastic. I've reread this miniseries at least 5 times, and it gets better and better every reread. And what's not to love with this series? Gyer is set years after a nuclear war ravaged the planet. Desperate outlaws battle for survival in a world of radioactive chaos. Out past the poisoned wasteland lives a man even the Nightcrawlers and Oregon people fear. Some name him Joe Glow, others call him the Meltdown Man, but his name is Gyer. This series is a mix of Fallout and Mad Max and, I don't know, the Lego Movie 2? What I'm trying to say is that this series is set in a post-apocalyptic world. I definitely think this series would make an awesome movie series or TV show with many different seasons or sequels. It would also be awesome to see the other miniseries set in the unnamed universe be adapted. Like Junkyard Joe, a spinoff of Gyer. And it's all about the cartoonist Muddy Davis who created Junkyard Joe and a conspiracy theory mystery. And the series is all about sacrifice and brotherhood. Or the recent Redcoat series by Jeff Johns and Brian Hill. Redcoat is all about a British redcoat, coincidentally, and all-around rogue Simon mysteriously becomes immortal in 1776 after a run-in with a cable known as the Founding Fathers, which includes George Washington, John Hancock, and many other prominent American revolutionary leaders. I still haven't checked out Redcoat yet, but I've heard pretty good things about the series. I'll put it on my reading list. Anyways, I think Gyer could make an awesome one-off movie, like do a Powerbomb. Or they could make more Gyer content, because we recently gotten a lot of new Gyer comics. Like the 2-issue miniseries Gyer Ground Zero, and even a whole new ongoing series. But I haven't read either yet. I've only read the original Gyer miniseries. So what I'm trying to say is Gyer is awesome, and really shows that legendary artists and writers from Marvel and DC should really try their hand at making their own indie comics in the future. Number 3. Right after I released the Ultimate Spider-Man video, I went on a camping trip in the great outdoors. Kinda like that one John Candy movie. Now I know this sounds super off topic, but I promise you, this'll all make sense in like 2 seconds. Anyways, I spent a lot of my downtime reading, and 2 series I read was Nightwing by Tom Taylor and Bruno Redondo, and the other series I read on the trip was a comic called Grimm, written by Stephanie Phillips and drawn by Flaviano Armentario. I definitely butchered that. I am so sorry. The series has such an interesting concept and storyline. In the story, we follow Jessica Harrow, who is a Grim Reaper, but unlike the rest of the Reapers, she has no memory of what killed her and put her into this predicament. If this series doesn't have you hooked, I have no idea what will. The series has such great world building, with Stephanie Phillips and Flaviano Armentario giving their own take on the afterlife, and there's just so much detail and mystery when it comes to the world and characters. The show would work so well on Amazon Prime or one of the other bazillion other streaming services. Anyways, I don't have much else to say about this one, even though it's probably the one freshest in my mind. Mostly because there's so much unexpected twists and turns that happen in just the first story arc alone. But I'll say this series is fantastic and a huge recommendation from me. Number 2. Man, I'm tired of the MCU. If only there was another superhero universe that could be adapted, that hasn't been done to death already. But which one? No, not you. Not you. Definitely not you. Maybe Yes, you. Just you. Now, you may be looking at this image with all these different superheroes that you have no idea who they are, and thinking, Spider Knight, what the hell is this? And I'll tell you. The Massiverse is a superhero comic universe that was started in 2021 with Radiant Black, and spun out of many different books, including Rogue Sun, The Dead Lucky, and Inferno Girl Red. But let's talk about my favorite book in this universe, Radiant Black. I love Radiant Black. Radiant Black is a comic written by Kyle Higgins and illustrated by Marcelo Costa. I absolutely love this series. I've heard a lot of people say this book is like a combination between the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers comics, also written by Kyle Higgins, and Invincible. And I 100% agree with those opinions. With this comic having the action and character designs of the Power Rangers comics, and the character moments and the twists of Invincible. This comic follows Nathan Burnett, who just turned 30, and things aren't great. He's working and failing 2 jobs, his credit card debt is piling up, and his only move is moving back in with his parents. But when Nathan discovers the cosmic device known as the Radiant, he's given the powers to radically change his fortunes, unless the cosmic beings who created them succeed in taking them back, by any means necessary. Something that I love about this series is all of the changes this book makes to the status quo. I mean, hell, there's even a twist that changes the status quo in issue 5. No, not issue 25 or 55 or 555. Issue 5. And of course I won't spoil it, but let's just say it's so unexpected to say the least. Anyways, but what about the other comics in the Massiverse? Well, I read Rogue Sun, and the series is alright. I thought the first story arc was fine, because Dylan is a fun and flawed character, but such an obnoxious and unlikable character at the same time. He's like that one guy who's always an ass to you for no specific reason, but he's just always there. But in a comic book. So it's kinda worse, because you're trying to just relax and read instead. But I did enjoy the second story arc a lot more than the first one, especially issue 7 being a choose-your-own-adventure issue. And I thought that was super awesome, and we don't get much comics like that. I haven't read The Dead Lucky or Inferno Girl Red, but I have read all 3 of the Supermassive crossovers, and they're all pretty fun. I would recommend them. But I feel like all these comics would work as TV shows, especially Radiant Black. But maybe in like 10 years, because it seems that Kyle Higgins has his own plan with the series, and it's not finished yet. We still got a while. Number 1. And finally, the number 1 spot is, drumroll please, Bone. Yeah, this comic is fucking fantastic. And I know I said that all about the other entries too, but god damn it, out of all of these comics on the list, I would want to see this comic adapted the most. This comic is fantastic. But you may be asking, what is Bone? Well, you know the drill already, so let's go through this one last time. Bone is a comic written and illustrated by Jeff Smith that ran from 1991 through 2004. But you probably read the series in elementary school from the Scholastic book full-color reprints. I absolutely loved those versions. Even my school library had them. This comic follows the 3 Bone cousins, Phone Bone, Phony Bone, and Smiley Bone. A true icon right here. After the 3 get kicked out of their town, coincidentally titled Boneville, they get lost in the valley, which is this kind of like giant mystical medieval land. And the 3 Bone cousins get into some wacky shenanigans, like interrupting a cow race, Phony Bone scamming the town, getting chased by some stupid rat creatures, and, you know, fighting in a war between good and evil. You know, stuff that will tickle the funny bone. Nah, I kid, but this series is still fantastic. I love the balancing of the different tones throughout the evolution of the series. Because in the first couple volumes, it's kind of like those old Donald Duck comics, with a lot of great humor. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in volume 3, things start to change tone-wise. And it starts to get a lot more serious and adventurous, kind of like the tone of Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. But it never ditches the original tone or the humor. I remember reading this series in the second grade, renting the Scholastic versions from my elementary school library. Maybe not the best series to have for a school library, but what do I know? Do I look like the school board? Oh well. This series is like a combination between the Carl Barks Donald Duck comics and Lord of the Rings. I know, what a weird pairing, but it actually really works well. Anyways, I think the series would either work really great as a movie or a TV show, or something, especially because there have been a lot of failed attempts at adapting Bone, and god damn it, these details are so interesting. So I'm gonna talk about them for you. Even though I've never talked about lost media ever on this channel. Maybe I'll start doing that, I don't know. The first attempt of adapting Bone was all the way back in the late 1990s, when Nickelodeon was interested in making a Bone movie, and it was pretty close to actually happening. Until Nickelodeon wanted to make a lot of changes that Jeff Smith did not like, including having more of a focus on Thorn, like changing the title. And that isn't the worst change in the world. I mean, the comic was originally going to be all about her, so not the worst change in the world. But the next thing they wanted to do is have the Bone Cousins be voiced by child voice actors, which is, interesting to say the least. And I definitely don't think it would have worked out very well. Especially because these characters don't really fit children's voices. Smiley Bone is always having a cigarette in his mouth, like 90% of the time in the series. But don't worry, it gets way worse. They also wanted to throw in pop songs in the film's soundtrack, similar to Britney Spears or NSYNC for some reason. And they also wanted to give Phone Bone magical plant growing gloves, because why not? Hey, I can't think of Phone Bone without his trusty magical gloves. Anyways, so I can totally see why Jeff Smith didn't approve of this. But that's not the last time someone's tried to adapt Bone, because in 2008, Warner Brothers bought the film rights to make the comic into a movie franchise, and in July of 2011 there was already 2 scripts that have been written and rejected, while a third was currently in the works. And it was going to be a CGI trilogy with motion capture technology, most likely because of the whole Avatar craze at the time. If I had to guess, this trilogy would probably be in the veins of Star Wars, or Lord of the Rings, if you will. And in January of 2012, Patrick Sean Smith, the creator of the TV series Greek, was hired to write the adaptation, and PJ Hogan was hired to direct. And it would have been produced by Lynn Pictures and Animal Logic. In November of 2016, Mark Osborne was hired to direct the animated film for Warner Animation Group, who directed the first Kung Fu Panda and The Little Prince. Along with Adam Klein was set to write the film, who hasn't written much. The reason why this didn't go anywhere is because in October of 2019, the Bone adaptation moved from Warner Brothers to Netflix, and it was reworked into an animated series, which I think, in my opinion, works way better in adapting Bone. But, however, in April of 2022, production on the series was canceled due to a restructuring at Netflix's animation department, and this really sucked. And as of February of 2023, Jeff Smith is attempting to approach other animation studios to continue working on the series. And I feel so bad for him, because Jeff Smith has gone through 3 different attempts of adapting Bone, and I was really excited for the Netflix show. He even made this comic mocking Peanuts and his life experiences. Anyways, what were we talking about? Lost media or comic books? We may never know. Anyways, that was my top 5 list of comics that I totally can see adapted in the future. And all of these comics are fantastic in my opinion, and I would highly recommend giving any of these a shot. I purposely didn't spoil much, so you can just read them for yourself and be surprised like I was. But before I sign off, are there any comics that you want to see adapted in the future? Put them down in the comments below. Anyways, I'm going to go to bed right now because I'm tired and I need to take a snooze. Good night, everyone.